Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Jay Loff. I'm one of the co-founders here at Charter, and on behalf of all of us at Charter and our partners at LifeLabs Learning, welcome to the first Charter Skills Accelerator of 2024. Many of you will probably remember that we launched this program back in 2022 as another way of delivering on our mission at Charter, which is to help you, owners of the talent agenda, transform your workplaces to be more fair, more dynamic, more coherent with where the world is headed so that your employees and thereby your companies can thrive. This is something that we work toward every day, and we do it through the rigorous journalism that we provide. We do it through original research and through live programming like this one that we're doing today. For those of you who are less familiar with Charter, I invite you to visit our website at the homepage, which there should be a link in the chat right now to charterworks.com. And there you can learn more about the various approaches and product offerings that we have to serve you at Charter. I also hope that you will consider becoming a member of Charter Pro. Charter Pro is our exclusive membership for people leaders that provides you with additional tools, resources, original research, and private events that help you in that transformation journey. It's less than $300 a year, and today, for Skills Accelerator attendees, we're actually offering a 35% discount on a 3-month trial for Charter Pro. So if you click on the second link you should see in the chat for Charter Pro, it's an exclusive link to that discount registration page. So either click on it now or copy it and use it later, and you can try us out for 3 months for pennies on the dollar, and we hope that you'll take the opportunity to do that. Before we launch into the program, I just want to recognize and thank our longtime partners in this program. Firstly, Brand Live, which is the live streaming platform on which we will all interact today, and has actually become the live streaming platform for virtually all remote programming that we do here at Charter. They've been working with us since 2022. It's a terrific platform, and I certainly recommend that you may think about using it within your own company. And of course, I want to thank LifeLabs Learning, the premier upskilling training organization that has been working with us on this program since 2022. Over the years, they've worked with more than 500,000 employees across more than 2,700 of the most dynamic companies in the world, from Fortune 500s to high growth disruptive startups. Helping train and upskill people up and down the org chart. And we're really excited, delighted, and grateful to be able to offer you a slice of what it is that LifeLabs provides through this Skills Accelerator program that we will enjoy today. So thank you to LifeLabs. Before I turn it over to our moderator, just a couple of quick housekeeping items for the program today. We invite you to say hello to each other, interact with each other in the chat. That's what it's there for. It is also a place where you'll see, as you have already, hopefully, links to additional resources throughout the program. And it's where you'll interact with the moderator, who will prompt you for moments where there's an opportunity to ask questions or interact with the programming. And then lastly, at the end of the program, you'll also be prompted with a link to just spend a few seconds on a survey to let us know how we're doing. And I hope that you'll take a little bit of time to do that. It's really helpful for us to be able to improve and iterate on the program so that it creates the most value for you as we go throughout the year. So let's get into this program today. I'm really excited with where we are starting, because one of the primary differentiators for high-performing companies is the ability throughout the organization for people to learn and adapt rapidly. It is a critical skill set that differentiates, again, high-performing companies from others. And thus, the topic today, as you know, if you've registered and you're here, Superlearning is what we'll talk about. And what we'll do is we'll cover a little bit of the shift from knowing to learning in terms of the way we operate and show up at work every day. We will explore and learn some really important scientific, research-based skills and best practices for implementing this methodology. And then we will practice some of those methodologies so that when you go back to the office tomorrow morning, you can implement them as quickly as tomorrow. And so let me turn it over now then to a leadership trainer from LifeLabs Learning, who will walk us through the program today, Brendan Nymphius. Brendan, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to our partners at Charter, Jay, and our partners at Brand Live. My name is Brendan Nymphius. I am a leadership trainer and facilitation lead for LifeLabs Learning. I'm really excited to be here with you today to get to share things that really matter to me, and that also might matter to you. Just a little bit about me and my background. So my background is in organizational psychology. Some of you know what that means, some of you don't. But really, for me, it's I study people in the workplace, and in particular, what I care very deeply about is what are the skills needed to be successful in the workplace. You know, for leaders, managers, teams, how do you help folks perform at their best, but also feel their best at work? How do you keep people motivated and engaged and learning? And so that's part of what we're going to talk about here today is super learning. Right? We're going to talk about this as one of the most we believe is one of the most urgent skills. And you heard a little bit from Jay about what we're going to talk about, and I'll obviously share more. But I'd like to get into it. And of course, at the end, there's going to be time for questions. And so if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please share those in chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. And I'll save some time so that I can share the answers to those questions at the end. But of course, I want you interacting, and I'll invite you to interact at times. Now, let's get into kind of what we're here for. And I kind of want to take you through this little journey through time, just to kind of give you a sense and give you some context as to what we mean by super learning and why we actually think it's important here at LifeLabs. And even today, I'll share with you a little bit about how we utilize super learning skills at LifeLabs within our workshops. Now, just not long ago, we really were in this era where what mattered was just making sure that we had the basic needs, our basic survival needs. And we went through like our agricultural era and our agricultural revolution. It really allowed us to thrive as human beings, really settle and expand. And then, we got into our industrial era. Now, I'm not an expert in history, but, from this point forward, it really was about, working faster, efficiency, again, just like how can we get the most out of people, and how can we continue to expand and thrive? And then all of a sudden, we got into our knowledge era, and we have computing systems, and we have, right at our fingertips, all of this knowledge. And the thing is that many of us, I think many folks think that, we're still in this era, we're still in this era of, well, knowledge. How much knowledge can I have access to, and how much knowledge can I gain for myself? We don't actually think that's where we are today. There is knowledge at our fingertips all the time. And so are we still in this knowledge era? We now have artificial intelligence, which is continuing to evolve in how we apply it to our daily life. But really, you can go online and just search something and find out what there is to know about it. Where we think we are today is quite distinct. We think we're in what's called the learning era. Based on our research and research in this field, we find that knowledge is important, but how we're utilizing it, how we're learning from it is even more important. And so in the gist of what we're sharing with you today is that expertise is no longer enough for people. We, in some ways, yes, we all have expertise in certain areas, and that is valuable. It's all of the knowledge that you do have is valuable. And at the same time, so much of that knowledge and expertise is available to us, sometimes with a click of a button. So when we think about the distinction that we're going to be making today and how this might be important to you and how this might benefit you, whether it's you learning on your own or it's you helping to build a learning culture for your organization, or how you set up training and development and learning opportunities for your company, of course, our ability to predict was important. But what we tend to find now more and more than ever is that it's our ability to adapt quickly. That's the difference maker. How do we know that? Well, many of you felt that in 2020. And it's like it became so real for us that now all of a sudden we go from working in a particular way to now we have to work in a completely different way. Well, whether that's working fully remote, which many folks were not used to. And now we're in this world of hybrid work where we're having to learn and adapt. We have change happening at not only our organizational levels, but our global levels. And so our ability to learn very quickly to what's happening what are the skills required? How can we use the skills that we currently have to apply to our current situation? It's more important than it ever has. And so, whereas learning is, has been and still in some ways is linear, like learn this, then learn this, then learn this, and then you reach your goals. What we tend to find more and more than ever, it's really what we call this rhizomatic type of learning. Now, that's just a fancy word for learning that spreads like the roots of a tree, where it's not only are we learning individually, but again, go back to what I said about a learning culture. Are people not only learning, then extracting that learning, but then transferring it and sharing it with other people? And so we now have like not only one individual learning, but usually like a group or a network of learning that happens. Right. And so in some ways, it goes from our ability to download information, which again, it's at our fingertips. You want to know things, you can know it, to updating, right? Our ability to update our learning, update our thinking, learn something new, a new behavior, a new skill. How do we then update our systems, things like that? So it's more that it's something that we're finding more important. All right. So we go from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls. Right. So it's instead of outsmarting people, it's about outlearning. And you see this happening. Right? You see this happening where it's like, yeah, everyone's really smart and we have a lot of really cool tools that people are using, and then it's like, how can we use those differently than everyone else? How are we going to learn? Like, for instance, go back to AI. It's like, okay, the organizations that are really focusing on sort of this learning era mindset are, how can we learn how to use this really quickly and then apply it to the challenges of our roles, the challenges of our clients, who knows it, whatever that might be. Right. So going back to super learning, this really urgent skill where we see a big gap really is going from being taught to know things to taught to learn. And not only that, how we learn best, quickly and rapidly. And that's something that we care so deeply about at LifeLabs, is how can we learn things quickly and how can we apply it immediately? And that's what we are calling super learning. And that is the shift that we really do see. And maybe you're excited about it. I know I am excited about it, is how do we become super learners? Now, that's something that we do at LifeLabs. I keep mentioning it, and I'll continue to mention this throughout the workshop. You heard a little bit about Jay. You heard a little from Jay about what we do. We train and develop leaders, managers, teams at incredible companies. And we teach them the skills that matter in the workplace. Our mission is to teach people life's most useful skills, ones that matter not only in the workplace, but also in life. And how we do that, right? You could see a short list of the people, like a short list of the companies, right? How do we do that? These incredible companies is we really focused on what are the fastest ways that people learn, and let's actually design and develop our learning experience to include those. And that's actually a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Now, to kind of give you a bigger picture of how we set up our learning and programs, which actually might help you set up your learning programs, right? If you work with us, you've seen this before, you've felt this before, but this actually might give you some insight to how to set your learning up. Now, one of the things that we do at LifeLabs, especially when it comes to applying these super learning skills, is we have live workshops. Now, I know that a lot of folks love to learn by, reading something, or even just like watching a video and obtaining that knowledge. But again, like we go back to super learning and how folks have typically learned. It's just, getting more knowledge does make a difference. But in our live labs, we actually provide opportunities to then transfer that learning. We find that happens best in a live workshops. Transfer that learning. Our facilitators, like myself, are going to help folks extract the learning throughout the session. So if I'm knowing something, yeah, that's one thing, I know it, but then how am I going to use it? How does this apply to my life? How am I going to actually link this with what I already do? And we'll talk about that. That's what happens in our live labs. Now, we also know that what's also important when it comes to transferring knowledge, and I'll mention this today, when it comes to super learning, when it comes to transferring knowledge from short term into long term, or to make sure that people utilize learning from situation to situation to situation so they can apply one skill to a lot of different things, is we provide them these nudges along the way. People tend to forget things, right? And so we provide them nudges to continue to apply. They get that digitally. So we send that via email automatically after workshops. Now, another thing that people get, and this might be something that you think about when it comes to your culture and your organization, is when we think about that, when I mentioned rhizomatic, right? If every single person in your organization is taking a workshop, that's great. If every single person, individual is getting some learning, that's awesome. Maybe they're like, I like my organization, I'm learning something, but how does that then benefit the company, the culture as a whole? That's where our program consultants come in. And they're just these learning and development experts that help you embed the learning within the culture. Again, spreading it out and making sure that it sticks, that it becomes in some ways kind of like part of the fabric of how you do things at your company. And I think that's kind of this bigger challenge within this super learning culture that we're in, is how do I have like everyone in my company really learning at a fast pace? So that's just a little bit about what we do at LifeLabs if you work with us, but also maybe even how you might want to set up your own programs. Now, here comes the exciting part, right? And this is what I love. This is what I'm passionate about, teaching skills that really matter. And this is kind of so meta, because the skills that we're going to focus on, extraction skills and transfer skills, this is how we help folks learn within our workshops, right? So this is just what we apply when we teach people life's most useful skills, right? So we're going to get into both, and I'll share a little bit about both of these particular skill sets. All right, so let's talk about extraction skills. What are we talking about? I mean, go back to, maybe when you took an actual science class in school, maybe you did, maybe you saw one of these contraptions, right? Distillation, where we have this liquid here, and then we're looking to distill something from it. And when it comes to extracting the learning, you might gain some knowledge. You could say like maybe that knowledge is over here on the left. But what we tend to see is that knowledge doesn't necessarily stick with you. That learning doesn't really occur unless we're extracting from it. And here's just a simple couple of questions that we can actually apply this right now, just using these two questions. One, I'd like you to, all of you who are out there watching, this is what we do in our workshops too, right? We're going to apply it. We're not just going to learn from me today. You're actually going to apply the skills and extract learning from them. I want you to think about something that happened to you this week, good or bad. Could be anything. For me, I had a really cool strategy meeting on Monday, and it was really interesting. Now, what can you extract from that experience? So that could be like, what's one thing you learned in that experience? So pause, what happened? And then what did you learn from it? And what I'd like you to do is type that into chat so that others can see. Yeah, let's make this an actual super learning event where learning doesn't just happen with us, it's spreading. So what did you learn this week? What can you extract from what happened? One of the things that I can extract from just being at our strategy meeting this week is the importance of linking departmental or team goals up to organizational ones. And that's one of the things I realized, especially that's important when you have senior leaders and executives in the room. Because at a departmental level, what I realize is when you're sharing your goals, when you're sharing the projects that you're working on, it all sounds familiar and important to me, but it's really difficult for executives to really understand how it ties into organizational goals if you're not linking what you're doing to that organizational goal. And that's just something that became really present for me in the strategy meeting this week, and I think makes a big difference for folks like our CEO who's there, right, in the meeting, trying to understand what we're doing on the facilitation team, right? So perhaps in chat, you can write in some of the things that you are extracting from what's going on in your life right now. And one of the things I'm seeing, and I just want to point out a couple of comments, Debbie, I love it. So Debbie wrote down the value of asking questions rather than relying on assumptions. Debbie, what's so beautiful about what you shared, and how, and this is something I just love to nerd out about, is that's one of the biggest challenges that managers and leaders face when they show up in a lot of our workshops, especially when we do our manager core series. They show up in our coaching skills workshop, which is about asking questions, Debbie. Our whole coaching workshops is how to ask quality questions, which applies to everything that we're talking about here today. extracting learning. And Debbie, one of the things that managers get challenged with when they show up at the workshops is they feel like they're micromanaging. One of the biggest things they'll say is, Brendan, I don't know how to balance giving direction to people versus giving autonomy. And one of the assumptions that managers tend to deal with is that they have a direct report who's like, hey, how do I handle this? How do I respond to this client? How do I do that? How do I fix this challenge? And the assumption that the managers tend to take is they're coming to me because they need me to tell them what to do. And guess what they end up doing over and over again? They tell them what to do. And go back to Superlearning. Now that person knows what to do in that situation, but guess what's missing? The learning. They don't know how to apply it somewhere else. So they keep coming back to that manager. And so one of the things we train them to do is to start asking questions. Start asking questions, and we'll talk about some of those today, but to help them extract learning, see how does the situation apply to something they've already dealt with so that they can handle it on their own. Corey, I love what you're sharing here too. The power of a thoughtful and collaborative approach to organizational talent development. Yeah, Corey, that's something our program consultants, if you work with them, that's something they're absolutely going to talk to you about and work with you on. Is if we don't have those key stakeholders, you might even call them like even your learning development champions, right? But if we don't understand our key stakeholders and what they're dealing with, how is our learning program and our talent development program going to make a huge difference? And so we run into a lot of barriers when we want to develop people, help, build learning and development programs, because we just don't have that buy-in. We don't know what they're really dealing with, what's happening out in the workplace. Maybe that's something that you're thinking about, Corey, when you shared that. That's something that I think about. Rachel, I have been extracting a lot of value from the colleague in terms of using Trello for program management. Yes, Rachel, we actually talk about in our productivity workshop, just having systems that help you to close loops and get your work done, and how people are sometimes they don't have exposure to what other systems people are using. And so they rely on their system, but that may not be the best way to close the loop and help you get your work done and structure flow within your work. And something as simple as just asking folks, what systems do you use to manage your work? And how do you use them? Is just like an incredible way of building your own productivity skills. All right, there's even more. What I'm loving here is people are already applying the skill. Right? And so when we think about learning programs, right, this might be an almost essential element. Is not only are they able to know things, but are we helping them extract? Same thing, and especially when you think about even super learning within your company, are we training managers to ask extraction questions? Are they having one-on-ones where they're just going, what did you do this week? Check, 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 check. That's what we hear a lot. Or are they asking questions like, what did you learn this week? And look at all the beautiful extractions that we see in chat, right? All of that is sort of missing or hidden if we don't train folks with these extraction skills, right? So again, it kind of, let's expand upon this and deepen with this. When something happens, we can look at the result and say, okay, let's ask some questions and let's learn from the result. And sometimes maybe when we do a retro, we ask questions like this. Now we'll talk about how to even make retros even better and normalize those retros so that we can build learning into what we already do. Now, this is what we call single loop learning, according to researcher Chris Argyris, right, who studies just learning and how we learn, the best ways that we learn. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking questions of like, how did I produce this result? What we see as an even perhaps more important extraction skill is what we call double loop learning. And this is less used, but we see this in the best learners, the top performers, the most strategic thinkers, is they'll ask even these second layer questions. Like, okay, if we encountered a problem, there's a difference between, okay, how are we going to overcome that problem in the future? That's great. So if you do a retro, on a program, maybe it didn't work out, or a project, it didn't go the way that we wanted to. We could say, okay, what didn't work? Okay, let's find out a way to fix it. But then we can also talk about, well, what contributed to that problem in the first place? Why did we even end up with that problem? And what was our thinking? What were we missing that problem even happened? How could we prevent that in the future? Right? And so there's that difference, that second layer that we want to go after. Now, one really cool example that I'd like to talk about comes from Dr. Atul Gawande, right? A physician, but also just a researcher, just kind of studying just like the ways that kind of teams, especially medical teams. My background, I have a background where I started my career in healthcare, but just how medical teams, how do we learn and grow and kind of improve our own performance? Well, in his book, one of the things he talks about was, he was a physician in a foreign country and a war broke out. And, in this particular environment, it's really stressful and people have to adapt very quickly. And so they were treating a lot of soldiers. And the doctors were treating soldiers and just noticed a significant rapid increase in eye injuries. Now, single loop learning, let's go back to it, right? So if we think about learning, one of the things that the physicians were asking was, okay, well, we're dealing with a lot of eye injuries. How can we treat them faster and more quickly, right? So how do we improve our processes so that we can treat the eye injuries a lot faster? You might say, all right, we have more fires. How do we put the fires out quicker? That is one way of approaching it, except they had people who had that super learning mindset, right? So that's one thing that they did. But what they also noted was there was also questions that came up around why are these happening? And some of you might think, of course, that should be an obvious question, but it's not always an obvious question. It's sometimes we're just fighting that fire and we just want to do it, take care of it, take care of the problem. But when they ask, why are the injuries actually happening, which is a more strategic problem, a more strategic question, I mean, what they found out when they started asking the soldiers is, well, they didn't like the look of the goggles that they were given, and they felt uncomfortable, the goggles, which was contributing to them not wearing them and then getting more eye injuries. So what did they do differently? Well, they improved the look and the feel of the goggles and the eye protection, and what they saw was a significant, dramatically decrease in the eye injuries. And so then they had to fight less of those fires. And here's the insight, is that when we learn on the job, it doesn't necessarily equal learning or the best learning, like the most impactful learning, if we're not pausing and extracting. This reminds me of something that we do within, speaking of fires, we do within our productivity workshop. When we think about prioritization, when we think about productivity, one thing that people deal with is they complain about all the firefighting, all the reactionary time that I have to spend doing this and that and dropping what I'm doing to handle this issue. Well, what about helping folks hit the pause button and asking themselves, what might I do to prevent that issue in the future? Or how can if there's a fire that I'm constantly fighting, how can I fight it faster? How can I create a process for myself so that it's easier to handle? Like that's that second layer that we train and develop managers to do with their own employees so that they're really learning and so that they can do their work in a more efficient way. And so one of the things that we would recommend if you want to just expand on this super learning is take some time for extraction, not just practice if you're doing a learning and development program or if you're teaching people things. Of course, practice is important. That's something we take very seriously in our live workshops, but we also spend a significant amount of time pausing for extraction. So that's like, for instance, in our live labs, we're going to be teaching a skill, having them practice that skill, and then we're going to spend some time extracting the learning from it. And that's where we see a significant and rapid increase in the learning and the retention from the program. So look back at your L&D workshops that you're doing, look back at the resources that you have, and perhaps be thinking of, okay, where are our extraction moments? Where are we building in time for extraction during the learning, after the learning? And that's where you'll probably see that folks end up not only learning that particular skill or knowledge faster, but then they're going to apply the same habits, those extraction habits, to future learning so that they learn even faster there. And so that's how I want to wrap up our extraction skills section. And if you're like, ooh, that was awesome, and I have some questions, don't worry, right? That's what you got the chat for. You can drop in those questions and we'll look to get to as many of those as possible. All right, so this is what we're going to do. All right, put in your questions and thoughts on extraction skills, and we'll build some time at the end for those. But I want to get onto transfer skills as well. So we're going to share two things with you. All right, two skills with you when it comes to transferring. In some ways, transferring that learning into what we might call that long-term learning, right? And it would be beautiful. It would be really great. Even you could argue, after this event today, it would be awesome if what you got was immediately applied and put into your long-term learning. I really wish that this was just a default for the human brain. You see something and all of a sudden it goes from short term to long term. I would probably know a few more languages if that was the case, but it's not the case. Some of you would be like, I know, you're right. I'd have to spend less time on apps like Duolingo if I immediately just kind of picked up on something and I knew it forever. But I think the bigger challenge here is that this actually ends up with a lot of just wasted time and energy and resources. And especially, this, if you're in talent development, if you're in learning and development, if you're a facilitator like me, or even if you're a manager leader, even if you're a participant, is that that you've been in these experiences where you've spent time and energy and resources trying to learn something, and it didn't go anywhere. It didn't stick. It didn't transfer into long-term memory. It didn't transfer into your life. And sometimes it's kind of obvious when that's going to happen. Like in the space of learning and development, I've done this, and I know I've been a part of this, a full 8-hour full day workshop. I know many of you're nodding your heads. You're like, I've been in one of those full day workshops, multi-day workshops. They sometimes are really fun and engaging, and they could be great. And sometimes when it comes to team building, but not when it comes to learning, right? So when we think about transferring from short term to long term, what's actually required, right? Even if you do those sort of 8-hour workshops, those full days, or those offsites with 3 full days of just learning, what's going to help us to transfer that from short term to long term memory? Well, let's talk about it. One of my favorite quotes comes from neuropsychologist Donald Hebb, and you probably, I know some of this quote sticks in your head. Neurons that fire together wire together. This quote sticks with me all the time, because I know that, okay, if I'm learning something, it's not going to matter if I'm not sort of building in those what we call those tight neural pathways, those really well carved out neural pathways that are going to help me continue to apply this knowledge, retain this knowledge, and use it in the future. Right? And so you can see the image on the left, right? That's where we get like that image of this human brain, right? And these neural pathways, these neurons, these dendrites kind of intertwined together. But if you look on the right, like I think an easier visual is, we know that if we, tread a pathway more and more, that pathway gets stronger and bigger, and it's easier. It's sort of like, oh, wow, I know exactly where to go. So let's talk about how you can do that, right? These are just some tactics on how to help folks transfer from short term to long term. And I'll talk about how we apply these in our workshops. Now, one thing is to link it to what they currently know or what they currently do. And that's one thing that I think where learning and development or just any learning can sometimes fail, is that it feels so new and unfamiliar, and they don't exactly know how the learning is going to apply to them and their lives. And I think that's exactly where to start. What does this remind you of? Something we talk about in our leading change workshops that we do with managers, because when it comes to change, we're all dealing with it. But when managers, one thing that we teach them is, when you're leading through change, if you actually want folks if you want that knowledge to transfer, maybe it's, they have to learn how to use a new system or learn a new process. There's new goals, there's new initiatives, there's always something new. If you want that to stick and people to start doing that thing faster, link it into something that they already do, right? So for instance, if they're, having to use a new system, when you're introducing that new system, talk about all the ways the new system is like the old system. This has the same features as this. The things that you're doing in this system, X, Y, Z, you also get to do in here. That's just a way for them to learn that new system faster, because they're already going to say, oh yeah, that's true. It's like this. They're going to start looking for all the ways that it's similar, because a lot of the resistance to change that people have, where things don't transfer very quickly, is because it feels so unfamiliar and new. So linking things to what they already know. We also do this in workshops. What does this remind you of? So this skill or this thing that you're learning right now, how is that a reminder of what you already do, or opportunities where you can apply this? Obviously, the next one, repetition. Yeah, it. When it comes to practicing and getting better at something and learning something, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, the more of a habit it becomes. And so, again, if we think about learning something, A super learner is going to look for opportunities to remind themselves to do it. Not everyone does this very well, though, right? But this is another thing that we build into our programs, and this is something that you might think about building into your programs. So one thing that we think about is ending a workshop. Facilitators like myself, we're going to go, okay, when are you going to do this, and how are you going to apply it? So let's turn this into action. We give them a mini mission, and a lot of the times I invite people look for an opportunity on your calendar, build in a reminder before your next one-on-one to have that conversation. If you want to give that feedback, okay, schedule a feedback conversation. Right? So yeah, it's like, okay, how am I going to build in repetition? I mentioned earlier on in the program, one thing that we build into our learning programs are digital nudges. So thinking about your own learning program, when you have that event, when anyone has that event, and I don't know what learning platforms you're using, whether it's, maybe LinkedIn Learning or you're using, some other sort of learning platforms like Udemy, I'm not sure if there's those digital reminders. So they're learning that thing, but then they're reminded of it later. That's something we take seriously at LifeLabs. That's why folks will get regular reminders to keep applying the skills. Another thing that we do in our workshops, which you might want to set up, is we have workshops that are spaced out. So our managers, for instance, in Core 1, they're going to take our coaching skills workshop. And then when they take the feedback skills workshop a couple of weeks later, a week to 2 weeks later, right, that is going to provide some opportunity for some repetition and practice. But also when we get to that next workshop, that next feedback workshop, we're going to ask them, what happened? What did you remember from last workshop? What did you apply? Just to continue to build in that repetition. And then the final transfer skill is teaching people. You've probably seen this before, but there's significant research that shows that if you teach someone how to do something, it helps you retain it. Not only does it help you retain it, when you're teaching someone how to do something, you're more likely to apply it. There's sort of that practice what you preach, right? There's that what we call walk the talk. So if I'm going to teach someone something that I'm learning, I'm going to hold myself accountable to that. One of the ways that we do that at LifeLabs, for instance, in our feedback workshop, one of the exercises that we do is we have managers or individual contributors, whoever participating in our feedback skills workshop, during practice, they practice giving feedback to people's bunny rabbit drawings. I know it sounds silly, but we have people draw a scene with some bunny rabbits in it, and then they have to give each other feedback on the bunny rabbit drawings. The learning there is the feedback that they're giving specific actionable feedback, or is it blurry, non-actionable feedback? And that's what they take away from that exercise. But here's how the teaching comes into play. An invitation that we make, and an invitation we make to participants, at least that I do, is I ask the participants to go do that exercise with their teams. Have them draw something, bunny rabbits, houses, and have them do the same exercise. That's why we share the slides so that they can actually do it for themselves. And what we find is that there is a chunk of folks who go out and actually do it with their teams. They teach their teams the exact exercise, they have them do it, and guess what happens? They all learn the same exact skill. So it reinforces not only the knowledge for the participant, because they have to then teach it to their teams, but then they also get the benefit of that rhizomatic effect. Now their entire team has benefited from our one workshop. And when I see that happen, it's so beautiful because you get that awesome extraction the next workshop. They're like, this is what happened with my team. So going back to you, when you think about super learning and learning programs at your company, do we provide those type of teach back moments? And maybe you do. Maybe you invite folks to do lunch and learns. Hey, teach people what you've learned. And maybe they could be important skills, though. Maybe they could be important skills to the workplace that everyone could benefit from. So you think about those lunch and learns and other opportunities, which actually brings me to these questions. I want you to pause. I'd like you to think of what are some transfer tactics that you already have at your company. And it could be related to anything we shared about today, but, such as, repetition. What are our transfer tactics there? Do we build in repetition? How do we build in repetition? Or teaching or teach backs. Do we help folks not only learn things, but maybe transfer that by teaching it to someone else? Sometimes that might be mentorship programs. So I want you to pause and think of any transfer tactics that you have, and then throw those into chat. so that other people can share, benefit from what you're doing, see what you're doing. So go ahead, share any transfer tactics in chat. And I might get a little taste of some of the nuggets of wisdom that you're all sharing. I want to give you opportunities to transfer, right? To transfer your learning, right? What's worked well when it comes to reinforcing learning at your company? What are you doing? What does that look like? And I'll try to take a look at what folks are sharing. Yeah, there we go, Debbie. I mean, Debbie's like our all-star participant for the day too. Yep, teach backs. Yep, with management training, I love when I see that, like the teach backs in there. It's something I promote, especially, and a lot of our facilitators promote that teach backs. Especially, it's like, well, if you're learning how to give feedback, all right, not only are you going to have a feedback conversation, but hey, why not share with that person you're providing feedback to, especially if it's your direct report, what you've learned, right? Like, this is, how I've shifted my feedback skills so that everyone benefits. Yep. We have cybersecurity team launches regular phishing simulations to reinforce the cybersecurity training employees have taken. Yeah, it's like, I feel like our IT teams are in sync because we just did the same thing. I'm like, haven't I done this phishing before, training before? But guess what? We have seen. I think the beautiful part is our cybersecurity team, like they did a phishing training last year, and then all of a sudden we got some new tests and some new training this year, and it's like, why are we doing this? But then they share with us the results, and they share with us how many kind of us failed the phishing tests the other last year, where it's like, oh, you clicked on that thing, someone downloaded that results, and they share the kind of difference that we've made this year, and you see like, oh wow, I guess we are learning as an organization to not click on suspect links that we get in email. So Jenna, yeah, I think cybersecurity, they got the super learning mindset. I love that. Right. Now, when it comes to transferring, I want to keep it moving. So transferring short-term memory to long-term memory, yeah, that's absolutely important. We've given you some tactics when it comes to linking, when it comes to repeating, when it comes to teaching back, right? Those are 3 things to do. But then there's also, okay, does it make sense for me to learn every single thing needed for every single situation? We can't do that. We can't possibly know how to deal with every single situation. We can't know everything. So something that we actually take very seriously at LifeLabs when it comes to a super learning mindset is, what are some skills and knowledge that we can use to transfer from situation to situation? And that's why you see that Swiss Army knife there. It's like this small set of skills that we can apply in a variety of situations. And that's something else when we think about super learning, or even how to learn faster. So here's a few tactics when you come from how to transfer so that knowledge and skills can be used in a variety of situations. So the first one, analogize. Now, what does that really mean? It just means making those connections and comparisons, right? So what is this situation? What situation is similar or familiar? Now, how does that possibly show up as a kind of super learning skill within the workplace? It's something that we actually talk about in our coaching skills workshop. One thing I've mentioned already is that managers suffer with the challenge of giving a lot of direction and advice to people, but that doesn't necessarily make the difference. So giving direction and advice all the time makes that manager a bottleneck. So one super learning kind of tool that we give them is to step into a question. So when a direct report comes to you and they say, hey, how do I handle the situation? Well, why not train that person to say, oh, well, listen, how is this situation similar to something that you've already dealt with? And that question alone, all of a sudden, now that person's already existing knowledge is able to apply to this new situation. And it's amazing how often that happens. It's amazing how often new situations that we deal with, that we feel like, oh, this is so new, I don't know what to do. Well, if we just ask ourselves these questions of how is this already familiar? What skills do I actually already have that I can use? And that brings me to this next that next question, right? So not only analogize, find the similarities, is also to do what we call demarcate. Now, demarcate, it's like lines, lines on a map. It shows you exactly where you are. In some ways, when it comes to super learning, that's another sort of indicator that you're a super learner, is that you can immediately pause and say, which skills and tools do we already have to overcome the situation? And something that's really important that we talk to managers and leaders about, especially when we do our people development workshop, is helping people to demarcate their learning on an ongoing basis. And that might look like, well, at the end of the quarter or the end of the year when you do your retros. Now, of course, we've asked those questions, what have you learned? But really inviting folks to reflect on their experiences and what skills that they've picked up along the way, what skills that they applied along the way. And why that's really helpful is especially when we ask folks, what are your strengths? And some of you are pretty passionate about this, strengths-based management, strengths-based leadership. When we're able to understand what our strengths are and how they help us, to navigate the workplace, when we really have that grasp of our strengths and we've demarcated what those are and what they look like, we can then apply those strengths in all these different areas. That's why folks really are focusing on transferable skills. And that's why you actually see people who are really successful in their careers. Yeah, they have some level of subject matter expertise, but one of the things they have expertise in is they know what tools and skills that they can use across a variety of situations. So perhaps creating super learners in your organization is, of course, subject matter expertise is great, but perhaps the expertise is in what are actually my really important skills and tools that I have, right? Which brings me to my last point, behaviorizing things, right? Now, this is something we nerd out about, and I'll give you a little kind of taste as of what we talk about here. So when we say behaviorize, right, if we demarcate a skill that we have, which is highly important. Now, that might be, feedback skills, right? Feedback is really important in the workplace. It's really important for learning, for growth, for development, for resolving conflict. Many of you are very passionate about feedback. But then it's okay, well, if I'm effective at giving feedback, what is the behavioral unit that I'm effective at? So when we say behavioral unit, we mean at LifeLabs, this is how we teach our workshops really, is what's the behavior I'm using to be good at giving feedback? That's an example of behaviorizing something. And that's our case study that I want to share with you. So one of the behavioral units that we practice in our feedback skills workshop, and this is actually, it's transferable, so we practice this in multiple workshops, is what we call de-blurring. The ability to de-blur your feedback. Now, in application, we teach this in a few different ways and have them transfer it and apply it in a few different ways. Now, one of those ways that we have them apply this behavior of de-blurring is to remove blur words from their feedback. So when we say de-blur feedback, one of the challenges around effective feedback is that people give feedback that's neither receivable or actionable. And one of the main reasons is it's full of blurry opinions and judgments that aren't quite clear to the person, hence the blurriness. So take a look at this example below. And this is an example of what we might do in the workshop. So for instance, you take a look at the feedback in the first sentence. Your request is confusing. This might be typical feedback that people see on a daily basis, whether it's written in chat or on Slack, or it's given in a one-on-one. Now, this type of feedback, it's blurry. Why? Well, the underlying word, confusing. People don't know what to do with that. Yes, it might send a message to them, but now that doesn't feel good to get this feedback. And also, I don't know what was confusing about it. So the behavior of de-blurring is, how can I turn confusing? How can I turn that feedback? How can I de-blur it into something that the person really knows what to do with, that they can almost see what they need to do? And that's going to make it receivable and actionable. So you see the converted response, which is, you didn't share a reason for your request. Oh, okay. Now the person knows what to do with it. This is what we call de-blurred feedback. So in our workshops, what we do, especially in the feedback session, is they're going to write out their feedback. They're going to craft some feedback. Then they're going to practice de-blurring it. They're going to go through it. They're going to underline words that are blurry. Someone else is going to point out any words that they think are blurry. And then they're going to try to de-blur them into specific, receivable, actionable feedback that a person knows what to do with. So that's just an example when we think about how to transfer from situation to situation. because that ability to deblur a message applies to not only feedback, but, well, I want you to pause. Deblurring feedback is important, and it's a skill that we teach. But I want you to think, where else might we apply the same skill? So if deblurring is removing blur words, making things clear, just go ahead and into chat and just type in, where else would deblurring be helpful in the workplace? Type those in chat. Where else could we apply deblurring in the workplace? I want to see what you come up with. You're already putting it in. Put more in. I love these responses. We're learning right now in this workshop. And so you already get this. Whitney, I love it when we delegate. So when managers delegate, or when anyone delegates, are we deblurring our expectations? Are we being extremely clear with people as to what we want them to do and what they'll be taking on, what their accountability is, what the deadlines are, the milestones are? Of course, you could deblur when you delegate. Objective setting, yeah, Debbie. I mean, we talk so much about this when we think about objective setting. Jerome, goal setting. When we think about that, many of us use those SMART goals, right? We think about SMART: specific, specific, measurable, achievable or actionable. The same thing. Have we deblurred our goals? Are we saying, oh, we need to make things faster? We need to improve collaboration. I have so many people who come into our workshops, especially when we do our strategic thinking workshop, they come in and they have these very blurry objectives. And one of the things about strategic thinkers is they're not blurry when they set an objective or a goal. When they want to improve something, they don't just say, I want to improve it. They almost say, okay, you know what? Right now, it takes us 2 days to do this. I want it to take us 1 day to do it. That is a deblurred goal. Now we have a gap to close. We don't just say, oh, let's make things faster. Yep. Performance evaluations. I can't tell you how many times coaching managers and leaders over the last decade, how many times that I've seen not only performance evaluations, but performance improvement plans. How much of it is blurry. You want this person to improve, and I see the expectations that they set, and it's like, well, that's so blurred. How can they possibly improve their performance if they don't really know what to do? Same thing with those performance evals. That's why when we've looked at some research, performance evaluations have a net promoter score of -60. Now, if you don't know about NPS, net promoter score, -60 is next to like your worst cable provider or internet company. It's like it's not very good. Right? So how can we deblur our performance evaluation so it's really good feedback, or deblur our performance improvement plans so that people are really clear as to what goals and expectations are there for them to hit? Safety instructions, I know, Debbie, right? It's like, I hope we're deblurring safety instructions. Job descriptions, absolutely. Task assignments, career pathing, Jerome, so beautiful. Advocating for our own needs, Debbie. Yeah, that's one of the things we talk about when we talk about in our adaptivity workshop. We talk about in adaptivity, people tend to focus on the problem and they're just fixated on the problem. But rather, deblurring can also be used here. Deblur, what are the needs that are being unmet? When you have a problem, what are your needs? And be very clear and deblurred as to what your needs are so that you can focus on that. You're going to adapt a lot quicker when you're asking for what you need and want versus complaining about a problem all the time. So many great applications. And again, you've applied it right now. You have just transferred some knowledge. I just talked to you about deblurring, and now you're more likely to actually retain that knowledge and use it because you've just found other ways and other situations that you can apply the same exact skill to do. Right? So, hey, managers take our feedback workshop. That's one of the behavioral units that they learn that they can transfer from situation to situation. So to wrap up this particular section before we get to some Q&A, and I'll read through some of the questions that you asked. I have, a quote to kind of leave you with here. And you could read it. I'll give you a moment. And, sometimes I think this resonates with you all. And for me, I think one of the the benefits of this particular quote and why it's in here is it takes some of the pressure off of me. And I think we are living in a world in which there is a lot of pressure on us for many reasons and for many lenses. Sometimes it's a kind of individual pressure that we put on ourselves, or we feel this group pressure, family pressure, community pressure, organizational stress and pressure, or even the globe that we have to be experts and know and achieve and do more. And I think that if we consider that maybe the focus for ourselves is not just in being the expert and knowing everything, is that we have so many more possibilities when we are focused on learning. And again, now it's, if we become really good learners, we may never become the best experts in something, but guess what? We can adapt a lot faster to situations. We're gonna likely be more successful because we can, even if we have expertise, if we can't shift in how we use that expertise, then what does it matter? So for us at LifeLabs, and hopefully for you, is that you walk away with a super learning mindset, which really does shift you from this sort of finite know-it-all attitude or the pressure from the know-it-all kind of goals that people put on themselves to really this super learning attitude, which is, it just kind of gives you infinite possibilities. And I hope that's what you get. And that's why one of our values at LifeLabs is just always be learning. One of our values is not always be knowing. It's always be learning. And that's why we care so deeply about this skill. And I'd like you to pause and just extract learning, before you leave. And if you want to stick around for our Q&A, but just pause and just consider one thing that you might apply from our super learning session. And we've given you a list of things, think about what might I apply and how might I apply that? And I'll give you like 10 seconds to just pause and think about your extraction. Okay. So, other than leaving feedback, and I think actually you might be giving some feedback to our folks at Charter. And thank you for being. I know I'm getting some messages in chat, and I really truly hope this is all valuable to you, or you were just like excited about this topic. Yes, oh, Pacina, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad this was helpful to you. Yeah, I'll stick around for whatever time we have remaining, and answer any questions that come up, and also acknowledge any of the chatted messages that come in. And you'll get some links and some helpful and useful resources if you want to learn more about us, though, and you want to be proactive about that. Like if you're like, super learning's great, it sounds like you do it in your workshops. We do. That's how we utilize super learning in our workshops. We train and develop people on skills that allow them to be super learners and allow them to then kind of spread that super learning to everyone else. If you're interested in working with us, please contact us. events@lifelabslearning.com. And we have experts. So even if you don't end up working with us, you're going to learn something because we have experts in L&D, how to set up programs, how to diagnose what your needs might be, so that if you're setting up a program, you might know like what are the tipping point skills to work on, right? Which is, again, goes back to super learning. Like what are the smallest amount of skills that I can use that might help my folks apply and adapt to a lot of different situations. So please contact us. Let me see if there's any questions coming in. Oh, LifeLabs rocks. Okay, well, we have some apparent fans in the room. Rachel, thank you so much for that. I also would agree with you. I'm fairly biased, though, that LifeLabs does rock, which is why I'm celebrating 5.5 years at the company. So yeah. All right, I'll stick around. But if you are logging off or moving on with your day, I just want to thank you for your time, your energy, your attention, for your commitment, whatever you're up to in your life, whether it's personally trying to become a better person, individual contributor, manager, leader, and you're learning as much as you can and being a super learner. Thank you for doing that. And if you're looking to spread that learning and help others to become super learners, to help them adapt, to help them become successful in the workplace, I want to acknowledge you for the time and the energy and the work that goes into that. So again, appreciate you, appreciate Charter for providing this opportunity, to Brand Live for the incredible platform that you have that makes this possible. Can you give us some more examples? We got a question. Thanks, Courtney. Examples of behaviorizing. Yeah, I'll give you another example. This comes straight from our workshop. So one thing, one of our premier workshops is coaching skills. And you could ask, like, well, being a coach is important, right? That's one of the things we see from great managers, great leaders. You may have already known this is, okay, coaching skills is an important skill for managers. Now, when they come into the workshops, I ask them, what is being a coach? What does it mean to be a coach? And they write in all of this stuff. A lot of it is guiding, helping people learn. It is getting people to be like their best selves, like helping people reach their potential. And so when we think about it, yes, a coach guides, they help folks learn, they help them get to their potential, that they do all of that. They empower them. But none of those things that I just said is actually a behavior to practice. So Courtney, if I wanted you to be a better coach and I said, yeah, just go out there and empower people, what are we taking away from that? How do I actually empower people? So an example of behaviorizing coaching skills is, what is a behavioral unit of a great coach? What does a coach do that's different from other people? And one thing we focus on is they ask quality questions. We call it Q stepping. That's what we call it. This thumbs up keeps coming up. So what we do is we behaviorize coaching skills by helping them practice asking quality questions. So that's the example of taking coaching skills, a skill, and behaviorizing it into asking questions. They can do that. They can practice that, and that's what they do in the workshops. So Courtney, when you think about skills that you're going to be learning or skills that you're going to be training and developing people on, just be thinking, okay, are they getting to practice actual behaviors? Because if they're learning theories about stuff, that's fine. But if they don't get the behavior to do, and they get the ability to repeat it, practice it, transfer it, it's likely not going to make a difference. And that's what we think at LifeLabs. And that's why we get a lot of success in our programs. So Courtney, there's the example of behaviorizing. All right, back to you, Jay.
Brendan, thank you for that really amazing session. Obviously the feedback and the reaction, the interactivity speaks for itself. I will definitely be implementing bunny rabbit drawing at our company for sure over the next week or two. And for those of you who joined, thank you for joining. Again, if you can take a moment to fill out the survey, I think that we put the QR code up. It just helps us, again, improve on and iterate on the program. And continue to visit charterworks.com, where you'll see in the events tab the scheduling. We'll announce that, we'll push that to you as well. But you'll see announcements for future sessions of the Charter Skills Accelerator with LifeLabs Learning. Thank you all for joining today. I hope you have a great evening or afternoon wherever you are.